Welcome to the Tudor Dixon Podcast. You all know that every day we talk about what's going on in government, and lately we've been talking a lot, or you've been seeing in the news a lot, this stuff about government waste, government spending. You've seen the Doge being created in Washington, D.C., Elon Musk, you have Vivek Ramaswamy, all of these guys who are saying we've got to take back our government. And this is really the MAGA effect. I think it's very interesting because if you look at the way the Republican Party used to operate as compared to today, I think that you had even 4 years ago, Democrats and the mainstream media saying the Democrat or the Republican Party is in shambles. Nobody knows what the definition of the Republican Party is anymore, that Donald Trump's Republican Party is different than the traditional Republican Party. And now I would say after this election, we see a lot of strength in what MAGA is. And MAGA is going into other states. And it is the Democrat Party that is in total shambles. And so I wanted to bring one of my friends on today. He is the Speaker-elect in the state of Michigan. His name is Matt Hall. And I have been so impressed by him being kind of like the Doge of Michigan already, because he's gone in and said, we're not going to allow this. MAGA is going to come to Michigan and going to be strong here. And we are going to bring this Republican Party into the light, and people are going to see what it means to be the party of the people. So Matt Hall, thank you so much for being on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tudor.
Absolutely. I think a lot of this starts with what we're seeing right now in Michigan with corporate welfare. And this has come into the limelight recently because GM has said they're going to demolish part of their headquarters in Detroit, Michigan. I think that it's very interesting on the national scale right now because we just came out of an election where I really believe that EV vehicles was a major factor in Donald Trump's win and the change in the forced change by government for these automotive companies to say we have to change how we're making cars. They've lost money. However, they're still profiting. And now we see this situation where they're going out and they're saying, oh, we want money to demolish the building in Detroit. And they've always kind of had all the legislators say, sure, whatever you want. But you're pushing back on that a little bit. So explain that to us.
Sure. Yeah. And you and I attended a lot of the Trump rallies across Michigan together. And you're correct. You know, one of the messages from President Trump, and he did better with auto workers than he even did in 2016 or any Republican has ever done in Michigan. And his message was, I'm going to fight for you, and we're going to end these electric vehicle mandates. And you look in Michigan, states like Michigan, we did research on this. The amount of suppliers that are needed for these electric vehicles is way smaller than the internal combustion engine. And so the internal combustion engine is good for Michigan because we will keep all those thousands of suppliers and more manufacturing jobs. The fact that Democrats like Whitmer and Biden have been using billions of our tax dollars to accelerate that and the decline of the internal combustion engine we'll study it as one of the dumbest economic moves that has ever been done to destroy manufacturing in America and in Michigan. But to answer your question, we look at President Trump coming into office. I saw today an article in the Detroit Free Press that DeSantis is saying, you know what, maybe because of these tariffs, we're going to come back to Michigan and to the United States, and we're going to build domestically again. That's exactly why we believe in the tariffs, is we want to see the U.S. auto workers have jobs, and we want to see cars made in America. President Trump promised us that that's what he was going to do, and it's already working. But you look at GM here. GM still hasn't gotten it yet, and in Michigan, GM is saying, we want $250 million from the taxpayers to tear down the Renaissance Center, which is sort of the iconic building on the Detroit skyline, right on the Detroit River. It's been GM's headquarters for decades. And they said, we're moving out of Detroit, and we want you to pay to tear down the building and redevelop it. And the next week, they laid off 1,000 workers, most of which in Warren, Michigan. And then just the other day, they came out and said, There's two electric battery plants in Michigan, one in Lansing. They got over $200 million from the taxpayers to open that plant. They announced we're selling our interest in that plant and we're keeping the money from the taxpayers. And a Korean company, LG, is taking it over. And if they don't perform, then, you can come to us. And in 2031, if they don't have the jobs we promised, then come after us and we'll give you the money back. But these are the type of things that GM is doing. And I'm just saying, enough is enough. People don't want the big corporations to benefit over the workers anymore. And it's the Republican Party, leaders like myself and you, Tudor, who are standing up for the workers. The Democrat Party is siding with the corporations, and they're very silent on these matters.
Well, I think that you make a great point with that, because this is something that I talked about in my campaign, and I'd like us to continue talking about. And I want to bring it to a national level, because I think that, we have a lot of people listening that are outside of Michigan, but this is how it happens, so that you understand when you are voting, when you're going to the ballot box, what the people behind the scenes are actually doing, because there's so much corruption and fraud and waste inside of government, no matter whether it is Vivek Ramaswamy that is going to get it out of there, or Matt Hall, or whoever is in your state. You have to understand how this happens. And I want to kind of break into the Renaissance Center situation here in Michigan, because I think this is kind of, it sort of outlines how it happens across the country. So if you look at Detroit, you've got a mayor who has been very heavily involved in the elites of Detroit. Now, over the last, couple of decades, we've heard about the comeback of Detroit. The problem is that if you break it down, the poor folks in Detroit have gotten poorer under a Mike Duggan, and the rich have gotten way richer. So you have this great divide, which is how you end up with Detroit being the second most violent city in the country. And that has got to change. And that is where I think the Republicans will come in and say, we want to really, truly build Detroit back for everybody, not just for the rich. But you've got a situation right now where you have the 27th richest man on the Forbes list, Dan Gilbert, saying, I'm going to rebuild the Renaissance Center, but to do so, I have to destroy two of the towers. I have to take down two of the towers. So you guys might be saying, okay, well, what's wrong with a billionaire coming in and saying this? Well, this man has benefited from corporate welfare after corporate welfare scheme in the city of Detroit. Like I said, you've got that imbalance of very rich, very poor, lots of crime. It is a huge problem. Now, the latest is that he's going to come and say he wants this $250 million because he wants it to be named a brownfield site. So if you don't know what a brownfield site is, you get a bunch of tax advantages at a brownfield site, which is designated because the site has had a previous development that has had some type of contamination. So generally a factory. Now, I know this, having been a former factory owner, you end up getting a brownfield site because you have to clean up that site. For the life of the time you own the site, you're paying to constantly clean it up. You have to have a special environmental person. The funny thing about that is the little guys, they don't get granted the brownfield sites. This is not a brownfield site, Matt, but this is the loophole for the rich, I believe. And this is how they get it. So how do we have oversight over these things?
Yeah, no, that's a great summary. So you mentioned the DOGE committee and the work that's being done at the federal level. I listened to a presentation yesterday that Newt Gingrich gave in front of a bunch of state legislators across the country. And what he's suggesting, and I agree with him, is we need to take these efforts to the state levels. And how do we bring entrepreneurship and innovative thinking to the state levels? So one thing that I'm really considering as we take over the Michigan House next year, Michigan House was the only chamber in the country that flipped from Democrat to Republican in this last election. Let's embrace this. Let's create something similar in the state House that brings in entrepreneurs and brings in innovative thinkers, so we can come in and demand results from government again, and to find the efficiencies. So that's something, looking ahead, that I think we're going to bring to Michigan. And I hope that other states, embrace the same ideas that we're seeing at the federal level. I just say, to answer your question, you know, I say what's happening here and what's not being talked about is the consequence of these decisions. So what you're seeing in states like Michigan is over the last couple years, I think since 2021, we've given $2.1 billion out of our, now it's about an $80 billion budget to corporations on projects that have not resulted in great job creation. Okay, they were not doing what they were promised. We're now about $2 billion short on roads, on what we need to do to fund our roads in Michigan. And now we're looking at how do we find $2 billion a year to fix roads in Michigan. And so my point is the money we're giving to these few elites is coming at the price of everyone in the state in terms of roads, in terms of schools, and everything else that we all benefit from. And so, we have to move backwards from where we are, where Governor Whitmer in Michigan is saying, I'm going to have bad regulation policy. I'm going to have high taxes. I'm going to make it as expensive as possible to do business in Michigan. And then I'm going to pick certain elites that we're going to buy them down by paying them billions of dollars to come to the state, and we're going to pick them. That's not the way an economy should be run. If we can make the economy something where everyone wants to come to Michigan because we have good regulatory policy, good tax policy, good roads, a great skilled workforce, there will be so many innovative entrepreneur ideas that'll come out that we never could have centrally planned as government representatives. That's the kind of Michigan that I want to see. And because there's a Republican House in Michigan, that's what we're going to fight for.
Yeah, so here's a few ideas. I mean, first of all, full disclosure, I love GM. I have a Chevy Tahoe that I think is the best car I've ever owned. I think that they make a great product. I love the product that they have historically made, the product that is a gas-powered vehicle, the product that has an infrastructure to support it. And that right now, Michigan is in such dire straits that it cannot fall on Michigan to say, oh, we're going to try to figure out how to not only make EV vehicles, but then also support them with an infrastructure, because we need a rehaul of our entire grid. And that cannot be just to support EV vehicles. That has to be to support manufacturing. That's what we do. That's our history. And another idea is when we talk about these brownfield sites, you talk about innovators, you talk about entrepreneurs. Those are the people that I think that was intended for originally, those entrepreneurs, and also so that we could get these sites back up and running, get more manufacturing going. I would go back and review who has been denied. I mean, we were denied. I know multiple other small manufacturers who would have grown were denied that, while it went to the folks that were making massive profits. And so I think there is opportunity, even within our own history, to go back and say, these are the places that they will expand. They will have more jobs. They do. This is what this was designed for. And I think there's an opportunity. But you brought up roads. So I want to talk about that, because Governor Whitmer ran on roads. And this is, to me, this is also the manipulation of the Democrats. They run on something that is obsolete. They have no plan. They're never held accountable, because not obsolete, something that is obscure, that they're never held accountable for. And the media doesn't go after them and say, whoa, wait a minute. How will you fix the roads? If you every year give, from I think it was 2000 to 2024, the state of Michigan has given almost $23 billion to the automotive industry. Just hand it over, $23 billion. Think of our roads. Think of the other industries that we could bring in, and the irresponsibility of that. Because as we see this state right now that is barely hanging on, in massive population decline, struggling financially, the people of Detroit struggling more than any other city in the United States with inflation. We go back and say, man, that nearly $23 billion could have created an infrastructure that would have brought a massive amount of businesses here, not just roads, not just bridges, but we're talking about that energy infrastructure as well, that would bring massive data centers, tech centers, all of those things that are the future, that can be the future here in Michigan. We know how to do it. We have tech centers. We have massive tech centers for the big three, the automotive industry here. That can be the future of Michigan, but the infrastructure has to be there. So you came up with this phenomenal plan of $3 billion for road funding. And this is local. That's everybody, the roads we drive every day are the worst. You will see all from October to May in this state, you will see people posting pictures of their destroyed tires. It is just a given. We're going to hit potholes. There's nobody coming to our rescue. I mean, you go to Muskegon Heights near me, and you could live inside of a pothole there. It's so depressing. It's so sad. It's just devastating. So you came up with a brilliant plan of $3 billion to put into roads. Gretchen Whitmer never had a plan. She came out and she said she wanted to raise the taxes, which is always the Democrats. We're not going to raise taxes. Oh, wait, we're going to give money to our buddies and then raise your taxes to try to do the things that are key. So your point is, do those things. If you have something left over, you can have the cricket field in Oakland County. But right now, we have to have the basics. Government should supply the basics, which road funding should be one of the basics. You came out and said, we don't want to raise taxes. She got shot down on that. She's been in office we're going to go on 7 years now, and she's never fixed one road. The roads have gotten way worse under Gretchen Whitmer. So you came up with this plan. I think it was today that she came out and she said, we are going to, it's like a press release that was listed like Gretchen Whitmer has designated funding to the roads. It's less than 1% of the funding that you came out with. But it sounds great. I mean, this is the baloney of their party. They put a great headline out there and the media will run with it. It's 2.9 million compared to 3 billion. What's your response to that?
Well, you're right. I mean, Whitmer ran and won the election to become Michigan's governor on fixing the roads. She turned around, she proposed a massive tax increase. It was so big, not one legislative Democrat had the guts to actually introduce it. Then for 6 years, she turned around and blamed Republicans and borrowed billions of dollars. You think about this.
Michigan, that's right, borrowed.
Michigan had a $9 billion surplus, the biggest surplus Michigan has ever had. But yet Gretchen Whitmer borrowed $3.5 billion to fix roads. And so what's happening now is she's gotten to the point where she can't borrow any more money. And we're facing a big road funding cliff in Michigan where our road funding is going to drop significantly. I'll just say this. If you kind of look at red states like Texas and Florida and blue states like Michigan, what you see in states like Texas and Florida is during the pandemic, they took all that federal money that came in and they used it to invest in infrastructure and to cut taxes. All right. What you saw in states like Michigan, Whitmer came in, took that money and used it to greatly expand government and then dole the rest out to, a select few of elites, billions. They spent our entire state surplus. And then this year, to keep the funding up where it was, they took the money out of the teachers' pension fund and they cut 92% from school safety funding, school resource officers, mental health professors, counselors. That's why we beat him in the election. I mean, Donald Trump was phenomenally helpful to us. But where Trump won, Trump won many states. We're the one that flipped. And the reason is because Whitmer led them off this cliff, focusing on her national ambitions. She wanted to be the first governor to create free school lunch and free breakfast for every kid, regardless of financial need. She wanted to have these bold programs about everyone in Michigan gets free community college and free pre-K. Well, she had to take that from somewhere, and now we're suffering from it. So I'll
Well,
just
this
say
is
what we're
another
going to be
example of
doing.
subsidizing the rich. This is what they do.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what she knows. It's, again, the free lunches go to, it's not a free lunch for the kids who need it. It's a free lunch for everyone. So you end up with the rich families, and we don't have PE every day. We don't have health class. These are things that we need to focus on. But school safety, I want to bring that up because I believe she's the only, if not the only, she's one of the very few governors in the country who have had 2 school shootings while she was in office. This is something that she came out and she took political advantage of. And I think in a very twisted and disgusting way, because she and Alyssa Slotkin came out and cried on TV. We're so upset about this. We can't believe it. The parents of Michigan State have said they haven't seen any changes. They saw some siren system that nobody paid attention to. When the sirens went off, the students just kept walking. There was no announcement, no discussion. They have done nothing to figure out how Lansing, which is the 17th most violent city in the country, where Michigan State is located, they have done nothing to figure out how to keep the crime from Lansing out of out of Michigan State University, or out of Lansing itself. I mean, that's the real rub. Why do we have such a big crime problem in Lansing? They have also done nothing about Oxford, and I've had kids from Oxford say, there were memorials we wanted to have made. We wanted some response from state government. We got nothing. We heard nothing. And now she tweets just the other day how devastating it is. Again, taking political advantage of these poor families who lost friends, who lost family, who have permanent disabilities because of what they dealt with at Oxford, which also would have likely not happened had she implemented in 2019 the state police plan to keep our schools safe. Not only has she done nothing to keep our schools safe, but then she pulled school safety. So how do we not only have failing schools, but have schools that have no protection around our kids? How do we keep ending up with Democrats? And how do we make sure that the people know they're not for you? They're not for your kids. They're not for your job. They're not for your spouse. They're not for you.
Yeah, and the shooting at Michigan State University, if you recall, this was an individual who should have not had a gun under Michigan law. But there was a woke prosecutor in Lansing who pled him down to a misdemeanor because she believed that because he was African American and had a gun, that it was a racial disparity issue. And so she automatically pled that down to a misdemeanor instead of a felony. And so he had a gun. So woke prosecutors in Michigan are, we're directly part of the problem there. We have laws in Michigan that stop people that commit serious gun crimes from having guns. But because the prosecutors, Democrat prosecutors, aren't enforcing those laws, you run into those problems. We have a number of sanctuary counties and sanctuary cities in Michigan, and that leads to the crime problem too. Whitmer's solution is they're running bills this week to let more violent criminals out of prison early. Their plan in Michigan is, they wanted to eliminate cash bail. They're looking at how do we treat the criminals fairly instead of how do we make sure the victims and their families are considered too, their voices in these discussions. There's a number of bipartisan school safety bills in Michigan. The Democrats won't move because the far left is blocking it. I will not understand why Democrats don't see things the way we do on these matters, but it's one of the reasons they lost the election in Michigan. And hopefully they'll be responsive to the voters next year who put them out of office because of the huge spike in crime in states like Michigan because of these policies.
Yeah, it's funny. The radical stuff didn't win. And they should know that these radical stances didn't win. And yet I see them talking about $10 million to put tampons in the boys' bathrooms in school. It's funny because I said to my kids, I'm like, that's interesting because when I was in school, that was actually a product that the girls used. It's never free. It was never provided to us. This is just a virtue signal. This is not something that they actually believe $10 million should be spent on. Instead of that money going to roads, going to local people, or for heaven's sake, actually going to teachers or to going toward school safety, they're virtue signaling, which I'm all for, because I think that if this is the direction they want to go, then let them continue to go further and further left. And ultimately, the people who are reasonable and that MAGA base will come in, and we will make sure that we are there for the people, that we are there for families, that we are there for safety, that we are there for businesses, and making sure that we're there for entrepreneurs. I mean, what's your response to these crazy bills, the fact that they still think that this resonates with the people? I'm sure you partially go, okay, hey, let's get through lame duck and let them keep saying this stuff and show the people who they really are.
Yeah. So, their immediate response to losing the election in Michigan was to come in the next week and try to change the election laws. And they tried to force a national popular vote on us to take Michigan's voice away from the election and give it to the popular vote. Well, that would not have stopped Donald Trump. Donald Trump won the popular vote. But, they aren't looking at why did this happen to us? They're looking at how can we stack the deck even more to win next time? And I think people, all these topics we're talking about today, whether it's lawfare, whether it's corporate giveaways, whether it's, as you mentioned, people that aren't connected, not being able to get the same benefits from the government as the connected few. Our tax dollars not being spent in ways that benefit all of us. People are feeling like this is a rigged system where the average person cannot get ahead anymore in a state like Michigan or in this country. That's why they elected Donald Trump. That's why they elected leaders like myself at the state level. In Michigan, I mentioned, our population is shrinking. We're like 49th in population growth. And Democrats are looking at these policies that grow government and are going to ultimately lead to our tax increases. During the pandemic and others, you look at the states that are growing, like Florida and Texas, and even states like Indiana, they're lowering their taxes and they're improving their regulations. And so I'll just say these state policies really matter. And so that's why it's so important what we're doing. And we're going to try to put Michigan back on a track so we can grow again like these other states are. And we want Michigan to be a state where people feel like the average person can get ahead again. So in Michigan, winning the House is that first step. But until we get rid of Governor Whitmer, we're still going to be lagging some of these other states.
Right. But I think this is a great example for folks out there who are saying, okay, what does it mean to get involved in local government? What does it mean to monitor? Or how can I talk to my local representative or our Speaker of the House? I think this is a great example of how you can get in there and make real changes for the people, and just the amount of low-hanging fruit there is in Michigan. And now we have someone who is truly America first and truly Michigan first, who will go in there and say, okay, these businesses at one point wanted to expand. They are in all of these rural communities. Look at how we can help our existing low-hanging fruit to expand. What other businesses can we bring in? How can we then, because the more businesses, the more people you have, the lower your spend has to be, the lower your taxes have to be, because you'll get more taxes, the more businesses and the more people. It's just common sense. So let's increase what we bring in, and then we can spread that around, and people will have to pay less as long as we're, have many hands in there with less work. It will be amazing. And that's what someone like a Speaker-elect Matt Hall can do for us. And so I'm so glad you all joined us today. And Matt, I'm so glad you were here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And, I want people to know that it's my intention. I think we're sick of the Republicans winning and then not honoring the commitments. Michigan and other swing states, we swamped the vote. We overcame the odds. And now it's on us to deliver for the people of this country and the people of Michigan. And they have my commitment. That's what we're going to do here in the State House in Michigan.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Tudor.
And thank you all for joining us on the Tudor Dixon Podcast. For this episode and others, go to tudordixonpodcast.com, the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And join us next time. Have a blessed day.